All right, you guys, I'm headed out to my barn gym here. I'm gonna get in a nice little quiet spot because I wanna lay out 3 really good principles in this video that is gonna help you understand and recognize the loops and patterns that you're in that's keeping you from losing the fat that you're trying to lose and ultimately live a life beyond average, that one that you're desiring to live. Let's get into it. Training men for the last 16 plus years has made me very aware of the cycles that men keep going through that ultimately keep them from living beyond average and losing the gut that they hate, losing the man boobs that embarrass them, that keep them from taking off their shirt at the pool. And so every time I'm training somebody new, I get to see the repetitive cycles that they go through. This has given me a ton of awareness on how to construct their training program, but also more so that internal piece, that piece of the mind and the heart that needs to continue to grow, shift, and change so a forever change happens in their life, not just one that's temporary that you get from a fad diet or from trying the next challenge, but one that you get to keep forever because true and lasting change takes place. That's the ultimate mission in my heart for men to go through. And so that really just takes us in, ironically, of having awareness of these things, takes me into key point number 1 for you is really recognizing the loop, having awareness of this loop that you're dealing with. So when I say loop, what does that mean? It means you're likely going through the same cycle over and over and over again. And I'm going to give you a couple pieces that are gonna help you understand this further. So here's one that's going to relate completely into so many men's life. One of them is they get up in the morning, they feel guilty about all the crap that they ate the night before, so they don't eat breakfast, and then they think they're gonna fast and not eat lunch, and then they get home and they have the right intentions, eat a quality meal in the evening, but then get so hangry because they're so under-calorie from the first part of their day that they end up binge eating. They go back and forth to the cupboard, to the couch, the fridge to the couch, and before you know it, they've taken in thousands of calories because that hangriness took over. Well, then that same cycle repeats the next day. They feel guilty about what they ate the night before, and it just goes and loops and loops and loops. So how do we become aware of things so we have the power to step out of them? Okay, I've gone through this in my own life in the standpoint of my relationship with my wife. So me and my wife have been together since we were 16 years old. We were high school sweethearts. And so we're 37 now. So over half of our life we've been together, which is wild. So we've had to actually grow and change and accept each other's changes throughout our relationship. But we've also gone through, and we didn't know we were going through this loop where we'd have, a time frame of like a couple good years that would then lead into like an okay partial of a year, which would lead into like a terrible 6 months. And then we'd reframe, you'd fix it, and then the same like 3-ish year pattern would repeat itself. And every time we think it was fixed, we think it was fixed, we think it was fixed. It took finally going through that so many times where finally it crashed out so bad that something had to finally change, okay? We had to become aware of the actual pattern that kept happening and rehappening. We actually had to become aware of the whys it was happening. So why do you keep starving yourself every morning? Why do you keep making the trips back and forth from couch to fridge and couch to pantry? We can't just stop at, okay, I see the same patterns happening. We have to then go another step forward into the why behind it's happening. Okay? And so after this last loop that me and my wife went through in like 2022, 2023-ish, we had to actually go into the whys. We couldn't just recognize the same pattern repeat over and over and over. And so once we did that and we went into the whys, we were able to then step out of the loop. And it's really funny because even in that same time frame, we're like 3 years out now again from that time frame. And so really that same loop in the past, we'd be seeing it happen again right now, but we're not because of the action steps that we're taking forward. It's funny because even to that standpoint, 4 years ago, I was in some of the best shape of my life. I mean, I was hitting the trails, I was lifting, I was super lean and feeling great. And our relationship was money right here. This was 2022. And then that same cycle started happening. And it's funny how that internal and external area of how great I was feeling then switched and turned into the loop. And it turned into this, where just a year later, I was at some of my worst because of everything that was going on. I had totally lost sight of myself in this same cycle, okay? And found myself extremely, like, most guys wouldn't even know that I was overweight because I was still lifting 6 days a week in this photo. I never stopped working out. I was still actually eating quote unquote healthy foods in this too. But I was not training to the best of my ability. I was not staying locked in with how much of the healthy foods I was eating. You can eat as healthy as you want and not get the result you want. Its proof is right here between the two photos. And so I had to really become real with myself in all of that and how it started to take a toll on my health and my body going through these loops. And so once you can actually do this and see the loop, you can go into the next step, which is step number 2. And that's taking the lap, okay? You just saw me take a lap in this last 3 years. So we have the picture of 2022, the crap valley year of 2023, and then there's these last 3 years of where we finally have gotten our stuff together because we became aware. Remember that step 1 is the awareness and asking the better questions, asking the why things are happening, okay? But just because you go through step number 1 of becoming aware of it and asking questions doesn't mean the loop stops. You actually have to go through that loop again, which is step number 2. You have to take the lap one more time at least, one more time, in order to step out of it. You can say you're fixed, you can say you're healed, you can do all the things you want until you're faced with the same adversity and you go through it with success the next time. Think about that. You can say, I'm never gonna binge eat again, when all you're around is prep food and meals and the perfect scenarios with no outside pressure. But what happens the minute you get around where you're out on a trip and you don't have the prep food, you don't have the gym accessibility, and you don't have the positive influences around your life, and then you have to make the right choices for yourself? You have to be able to actually go through the loops to actually step out of it. So if a cycle, think about a cycle as a circle, and we step out of it, this is where the mindset comes in for you guys. Beforehand, it was a closed loop. It was a closed circle. Now, when you gain awareness from this, which is taking the lap, by the end of that lap, you get to finally see that, oh, this circle is not a closed loop. It is a dotted line circle. And throughout all of that, you have a chance to step out of it. It is a dotted line circle. Step out of the loop. That enables you to then take action and create change on everything in your life. You get to now face all of the past struggles, all of those past temptations, and you get to face them with your new awareness and take new action on things that create the positive change that leads you deeper into the life that you desire, that live beyond average life. And that takes us directly into step number 3, which is the evidence. You've now created a system that you can continue to walk by and adjust and change as you grow. But here's the piece that you must do with the evidence piece. Pause and reflect on what just happened. View the evidence of what you just achieved. So after you've stepped out of the loop, you've seen it, you've been aware of it, and you've seen it, and now you faced the adversity, and you succeeded through that adversity this time, stop and reflect and view the evidence of your life. View the evidence of what you just created by facing that, and now you're stronger and better for it. That's the evidence that you have. And with this evidence piece, you have it within your mind and heart, but your spouse has it, or your kids have it as well. So now you're embodying everything you say to them, and you're not just an empty voice that sits there and tells them to eat healthy and go, be the best that they can be while you're sitting on the couch not doing anything. Now you're actually embodying the life that you believe in, the life that you desire, and you're doing it. Remember, these things don't happen overnight. It's not a light switch that happens overnight that now you're just the man that your family wants, that your wife wants, that your kids want, that you want. No, it's a transformative process that we go through. Every time you create more awareness, you have the opportunity then to change. What you aren't aware of, you cannot change. That is why that is step number one. What you aren't aware of, you cannot change. It is so important that you start there. From there, you have to then go through the whole thing and take the lap. That is step number 2. Take the lap, face the adversity, and react differently the second go around, or the third or fourth or fifth or 12th, if it's like me and my wife through that struggle, okay? And so go through that. Take the lap, create the evidence of improvement. Okay, and that evidence then empowers you that things are progressing in your life. Remember, here's the thing about the evidence and the empowerment. Evidence does not mean perfection. It does not mean that you're not going to struggle with it again or go through it again. It just means that you've improved on it and that it empowers you then to do it again. It empowers you to face the next loop that you're struggling with, because you don't just have one loop in your life, most likely. But that going through the one thing helps you see and be empowered to go face the next loop and create the change and take the lap through that loop, okay? And create more evidence. Every time you create more evidence in your life to stimulate more change in yourself. And now you're actually living what transformation actually is. It's the continued metamorphosis in our life as you grow. My friend once told me this, and it stuck with me forever. He gave me this analogy of if you go look at a tree that's been cut down, and at some point in that tree's life, somebody took an axe and hit it, and it created a trauma in the trunk of a tree. Envision that. But it was just a hit or two or through whatever, but it didn't chop down the tree, but the tree lived and it continued to grow. But after it grew, it creates a scar in that tree where it was hit with the axe. But the tree continues to go around that scar. And when you cut down that tree, you can look at the rings as evidence of that tree's life. You can see every loop. But every year that tree grew, right away that first year it went around that scar and it was really tight to that scar and it created that scar trauma. You can even see it outside the tree. You can see it in the bark. But pretty soon, after every loop around, every year you get 20, 30, 40 years down the road, that trauma there in the tree outside on the bark really isn't noticed. And even on the inside, you see those rings. And where it was a really big bump before, every time it went around, there was a big bump around it. It's grown all completely around that scar, and now the rings again are perfectly round. Every time you go through your negative loop and don't address it, you're just running into that scar. But if you actually go around the loop and grow, like the tree continues to grow around it,
it gets a little less tough to get around that scar every time you go by it. Every time you create evidence in your life that you can step out of the loops and improve, you make a bigger loop around that scar. And pretty soon, it's just a little bump in the road. And pretty soon, it's not even there. You don't even recognize it because you've grown all the way around it. You've actually transformed your life internally, which then yields to the external change that you're desiring to see, which it could be the relationship in your life, like mine was. Mine totally was this relationship externally in my life that also ate me alive internally, that gave me then external and internal issues, right? I had them in the repeated loop, but I also had them in my health that you can see in those two photos. But then when I actually built this system and could recognize the steps, it helped me able to step out and heal and make that whole journey. And in that last 3 years time frame, it doesn't mean that we didn't hit a bump in the road. You know, we didn't hit a scar. And the first several times hitting those scars, it hurt, it was painful. We had to communicate through it, which we weren't doing before. And then it became a little bump in the road. And now it's like we can look back on it as the evidence of the change we made and the positive, beautiful changes that happened because of it. And now that scar isn't looked at as, oh man, we're almost to that 3-year time frame again, and when we hit that, it's gonna be terrible. No, now it's the evidence of, oh my gosh, look at when we became aware of this. And we actually asked why this was happening, and then we took the action steps on it, and we chose to step out of this loop together, and we created the change, which then created the evidence that we could do this. Look what happened in our life, and now we don't have to go through this anymore. And now we become aware of the other loops that we're in, and we can repeat that same system that was built and create the same evidence and transform our lives completely. You can do the exact same thing with your health and your fitness. You can see why it is that you keep gravitating towards foods that don't serve you. You can see why it is you keep hitting the snooze over and over again every single morning instead of going and hitting that walk that you want to hit, hitting the gym that you want to go do. Why you keep setting goals and you say, I'm going to do it this time, and you don't again. And then you stop wanting to set goals because deep down you're like, every time I set a goal, I fail. Every time I set that goal, I quit. Those are all loops that you need to look at and face, ask why they're happening, and go through them. You can do this in every area and aspect of your life in order to live beyond average. I hope you can really hear and apply the principles that I laid out for you in this video so they can more deeply serve you, so you can create that change and start going through the transformative process. You guys, I hope you enjoyed, and as always, live beyond average.